improvement or the introduction of a policy which will actively foster a sustainable environment to establish and grow local IT know-how, which there has been a problem of a lack of local know-how on IT in Seychelles, which has curtailed the rolling out of digital services in Seychelles. Sierra Leone is looking at empowering citizens through access to information. The commitment is going to establish and empower the Right to Access Information Commission to ensure transparency and accountability within the public sector. And that will be achieved by implementing mechanisms and policies that facilitate citizen access to information held by government agencies and public authorities. And from all the commitments that I have presented and my colleague has presented, there's recurring themes which is citizen participation and transparency. For this, we see that from the initiatives from Cabo Verde, Liberia, Senegal, Sierra Leone, and Jordan. They're prioritizing open data, digital access, and transparency to enhance public engagement in governance. The second recurring theme is digital transformation and service efficiency, which is seen by the commitments from Burkina Faso, Malawi, Seychelles, Cote d'Ivoire governments who are modernizing public services through digital tools to improve accessibility. And the last one is inclusion and rights protection. Kenya, that's seen from Kenya, Morocco, Tunisia, with the digital commitments for including the disabled people, and also Nigeria for the strengthening of CSOs. And yeah, all those are focusing on bridging the digital divide. And lastly, let's all continue exploring ways to enhance digital governance in Africa, carry on collaborations with policymakers, continuing sharing insights, and championing inclusive digital solutions for all. I'll hand over to Leo.
Thank you so much, Gloria and Bwanzia. I thought it was important for us just to see how, especially as governments and civil society co-creating commitments are thinking about digital governance. Now, for our discussion today, we will hone in just on the theme of citizen participation and inclusion, and really we aim to see how can we, through the OGP process, make digital technologies work for the everyday citizen. So as I'm introducing my panel, I'll request them to move into the center of the fishbowl. And for those of you who weren't there when we were describing the format of the session, we'll have the lead discussants providing technical input and specific discussion topics, and then those of you in the outer circle can chime in and either react, provide comments, provide questions, so that we keep the session interactive. And the sessions in between the discussants will be 5 minutes long, so I think we'll only have the opportunity to have 1 or 2 inputs, so there could be comments or questions. So I'll start with Dr. Melissa Omino. Please join us, and you'll introduce yourself as you're progressing. Then I have Dr. Fola Adeleke. I have Alessandro Bozzini. I have Kumbuzo Nkunika. We have Priya Chetty. And finally, we have Maurice Thornton. So I'll give each of my speakers 1 minute, not even less, 15 seconds to introduce yourselves.
Good afternoon, everyone. Such a pleasure to be here. Thank you again, Leo, for inviting me to be here. My name is Priya Chetty. I've come from Johannesburg, South Africa. I am the incoming Executive Director of Research ICT Africa.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alessandro. I come from the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, open government team. Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you, Alessandro. Good morning, everybody. My name is Maurice Thornton. I'm a journalist. I also work with Social Watch Benin, which is a civil society organization. Thank you.
Hello all. My name is Fola Adeleke. I'm the Executive Director of the Global Center on AI Governance.
Is that all, Fola? Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Melissa Omino, and I'm the director of CIPIT, which is the Center for Intellectual Property and Information Technology Law at Strathmore University.
Hello, good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kumbuzo Nkunika. I'm from Zambia. I work in government. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So the aim of this panel at the end of the day is also to start reimagining how to better strengthen citizen participation within digital governance frameworks. So to kick us off, I think we can go local, regional, and then global. So to you, Dr. Melissa. You have played a key role in the development of Kenya's AI strategy and data governance policies. In your opinion, how can African governments develop AI and governance frameworks that respect local contexts? So very important, thinking about local context. And what unique considerations should African policymakers prioritize when implementing transparent and accountable digital services? Thank you.
I have 5 minutes only. Okay. I think maybe I should start by telling a story, because a story might capture a little bit more than giving out points. And the story will start with CIPIT venturing into the area of artificial intelligence. So CIPIT is a research center that focuses on legal policy aspects in 4 thematic areas, which is artificial intelligence, intellectual property, data governance, and what is widely known as ICT policy, which is a catch-all for everything around digital, right? So we started our work around AI in 2019 through a grant from the IDRC. And in 2019, AI was not as popular as it is now because ChatGPT had not yet been launched. But also because the question was, what would an African institution such as CIPIT discuss around artificial intelligence when you have questions around compute, you have questions around data centers, etc. So we decided to take the approach of defining African AI. Does this exist? What is it? And who is involved in that? So we first conducted a mapping, which is available on our website, essentially just looking for people who are talking about African AI, and we define that as AI that is developed for Africans to solve African problems. So if you are an African working in Silicon Valley, we do not count that as African AI. We wanted you to be solving problems that are relevant for Africans. So that brings in the issue of local context, right? And after doing the mapping, we decided to come up with a stakeholder mapping. So we mapped applications and then we mapped stakeholders. And that was a fortuitous adventure that we went on, because that's essentially what CIPIT. Okay, I can stand. Can you hear me? Just because of time, I don't wait for the technical team. Oh, yes. Is it back? Yes. She just informed me. Hello? Okay. Hopefully this one won't die. Otherwise, we can do it the African style where one person talks, the other one translates, like in church. But we might not need to do that. So I was saying that was CIPIT's inroad into the Kenyan AI strategy, because the strategy was trying to ensure that it had a local context, a Kenyan context, but in order to do that, we had to ensure that the stakeholders who were involved, the participatory part of the strategy, actually relied on how CIPIT mapped the African AI stakeholder framework. And that was really exciting to see because we moved the needle and said that the AI ecosystem is not just AI developers. It's not just multinationals. It's not just those who are in the economic industry that support these people, but actually involves users, right? And the users are essentially the local Africans who have a number of issues like access to these AI tools in the first place, even digital literacy, etc., which became a very important part when thinking about the pillars within the strategy. So what should our African governments focus on? Number one, they need to center local knowledge and values, and that was part of what CIPIT did, the knowledge that we created around what African AI is and what an African AI ecosystem is. They need to reflect that. They have to have comprehensive stakeholder consultations, which is what happened with the strategy. I think it is the most participatory strategic process that has been conducted in Kenya. You don't have to take my word for it. If available on Thursday, the launch is happening and you can hear that. There's also the issue about strengthening institutional capacity. If we hadn't started the work in 2019, then we wouldn't have been able to influence the process. And we started the work by reading and writing and doing, because we also worked with local African AI developers. That's very important for African governments to do. And there needs to be a balance between innovation and protection. And I think this is where the most tension is. People think that if you talk about governance, then you're going to dilute innovation. And people think governance is synonymous with regulation, and it is not. Regulation is a part of governance. So there has to be an effort, a concerted effort to balance the two, especially when you talk about data sovereignty. I'm looking at Leo to see if I still have time. I have 1 minute. So let me talk about digital governance priorities, which the LDRI team also touched on. I think some of the things we need to think about in Africa are the continental context factors, such as infrastructure, the realities of the infrastructure that we lack, right? And how are we going to really be conducting digital governance if there's no infrastructure? So we have to take a bite into that reality. The other thing that we need to think about is linguistic diversity, that also came up in the presentation, especially because we have over 2,000 languages in Africa, and we've already seen country contexts where language is an issue or barrier to digital services. And I think I really want to talk about inclusive authentication. I want to talk about, from a Kenyan perspective, about the identification of persons and how that authentication also limits access to digital services and is really an issue of digital governance. If you already pick that up from the analog into the digital, then you're doing a disservice in terms of accessibility, and that's a major thing in Africa because of the migration issues that we have. I have a lot more to say, but I've run out of time.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And I think there's always that tension also in policy spaces that if we are considering local contexts, are we really aligning ourselves to global, quote unquote, best practices? But I think being very intentional in how you're defining local context is very important. And I'm sure we'll be able to tie that in with the inputs from our other panelists. So I'll quickly scan around the room. Any reactions, comments? You can join the fishbowl. Yeah? Melissa challenged you. Okay. well, I guess then we'll claw back time and then move on to the next regional context that we are thinking about. And Kubuzo, perhaps you can give, from the perspective of government, what specific challenges that the Zambian government has faced in balancing innovation and implementation of digital services while ensuring, of course, inclusive access and participation. And what policies and practical steps have you taken as government to engage citizens from diverse backgrounds in shaping digital governance policies and service delivery? Thanks.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much for that. I'll start from just the basics first. In Africa, we still have, as rightly pointed out, power issues. Where there's power issues, it's a bit of a challenge to get digitalization going. But notwithstanding, we are doing efforts, a lot of efforts to get through that. And one of the challenges that we are facing rightly is local content, to make the technology we're trying to spread as relevant to the populations, especially in the far-flung areas of the country, as much as possible. And that is trying to produce content that will be relevant to them, because mostly the agriculture-based societies and the languages. Now, there is already a drive that we're doing. We've got programs, initiatives that we're running through our regulator and other institutions in the country, where we are really trying to foster digital innovations. And I specifically say digital innovations because I'm looking at the background I'm coming from. We have actually done quite a bit, and we have actually promulgated the digital transformation strategy, which actually has a pillar in it for digital innovation, and that is to set up funds that will help budding innovators to be encouraged to get in the digital innovation space and actually be nurtured up to a point where their innovations actually become commercialized and can get on the market. We're trying to identify role models and champions towards that, so that they can help with spreading this good news around. And some of the actually champions that we're trying to use, looking at the culture concept, the culture background that we have is traditional rulers. And we actually think that in the rural spaces in Zambia, if we have the backing of the traditional rulers, because villages are usually centered around those people, and if we have them on site, there's a bigger chance of us penetrating those areas with these types of technologies, that is, emerging technologies. I don't want to just say AI, because there's quite a number of technologies that will be coming. We're trying to be future-centric here. Will be coming as we grow in this sector. It's very, very transformative. On the second part, it was my computer switched off. Yes, in terms of policies and practical steps, government recently launched what is known as the Citizen Portal. Now, it's more of first it was a service provision portal, but that has grown to the inclusion of chatbots and some live interactions in the background where people can go on and find out what they need to do when getting certain services from government. Right now it's still very government-centric, but we're hoping to expand that to other areas of life in the country. The other practical steps, mainly it's about access. So we're incentivizing a lot of MNOs if they can provide devices, because on the government side, I'm sure you've experienced this, we are doing the connectivity bit. We've got most of the country connected, but we don't have access to those services. That's because of the affordability of the devices around. So we're providing tax incentives for importers and producers of these things to bring in the country at a cheaper rate for some time. And we're actually looking to have our own assembly plant for these devices locally so that we can just drop down the prices of these. Though we still have a struggle because when we're talking of inclusivity, we have to talk about the devices that can be used by like impaired people, say blind and the deaf. Those devices, actually, we found that the prices are a bit quite high. So we're looking to have points where there can be shared devices for access to these things. And we're using our postal network, which goes deep into most of the, because that's the original communications that was there. So we're trying to revive that. And we're setting up what are known as digital transformation centers. And in these places, these will be places where people can congregate, have a shared device, and then use it to access ICT services, which we hope this will be, which we hope eventually will foster the growth of ICTs in use of digital systems and ICTs and innovation in our very remote parts of the country. That's what we're trying to do.
Thank you so much for that. This is your one chance to tap government and ask them questions, or at least maybe provide suggestions of how they can really promote citizen participation, even with these amazing initiatives that they're doing to make sure that there's inclusion and access to every citizen of Zambia, regardless of ability. So again, opening it up to even the inner circle, but first, some interventions from out here.
Thank you. Just a question in terms of engaging traditional rulers to advance the digital agenda. I just want to know how that is going, like in practice.
Any other?
Thanks. My name is Liz Orembo from Research ICT Africa, and my comments will touch on Melissa's as well as the contributions from Zambia. And this is with the start that strategy is just the start, and strategy is a roadmap to which now we start implementing, or we start encouraging the development and the use of AI. So far, we are only seeing strategies and we're not seeing government commitments. He spoke about incentivizing tax cuts, local developers and even importers of digital equipment so that there's more access. I would be more interested to see African governments towards AI, giving life to AI strategy. What are they investing? Because there are things that we can't depend on external support to come and play into our strategy. One good thing that I really missed that made Kenya have improved access, improved connectivity and access to digital devices was during Kibaki's time, where we had partnerships with the World Bank to incentivize access for laptops for school-going students. At that time, we had zero-rated mobile phone entry into the country. And mobile phone, the prices were down even up to, is it $30? Yeah, and we saw a lot of change into the economy. So I think we also need to map out what is it that governments can do beyond seeking support, but what is it that they are also giving up for the development of AI in their countries?
2 minutes for response, and then we move on.
Okay, thank you. On engaging traditional rulers, I must say, it's something that is a bit of a struggle depending on where you are. Because these days, luckily, the digital transformation aspect and the proliferation of mobile phones into rural areas has made people get the desire to want to use them. But it's the affordability aspect that's been the problem. Otherwise, traditional rulers these days are up for development of the country, especially. They're comfortable if the people are happy. They have happy, happy subjects, then they know they're secured in their chieftainship. So it has been good. Actually, it's been welcomed around the country. There's a positive effect to it. But also it's because the current administration that's in there has a very engaging policy with CSOs. There's a lot of engagement that's been encouraged. Where we, in the past sometimes, I don't want to say much, but we would develop our regulations, our policies from inward, but now we're more outward looking and more engaging and bringing people to the table. We are actually ready to disagree certain times and agree certain times, as long as we go forward together. So there's currently a lot of engagement going on from the top, and as a result, that is kind of spreading down to everyone. I do agree on the second part that I hope I've covered. Yeah, strategy is a good start. Thank you for that. But we are actually very, very determined in this. We've got some financing that will help with this. We've been out trying to get resources, and luckily, the digital transformation agenda in my country is something that is looked at as an enabler of development. We really want to use that vehicle because it's a game changer for where we are, emerging technologies. You don't need to go through some of the steps the others have. We have a finished product. Let's just see how we can use that product to maximize benefit for our citizens in the country by doing that in a safe environment. That's what I can say. Just one more challenge. Sorry, okay.
Leo said I have 1 second. I think that was a very important question. We have strategies. Some people have policies. What about implementation? And why strategies? And this is me looking at you, Fola. I think strategies are important because they're an action plan. As has already been mentioned, the technology is here. It's being utilized. We need to come up with an action plan that makes sense for the citizenry, right? And the strategies come up with action plans. I don't want to preempt the launch in case I am reprimanded, but the strategy has various pillars. One of the pillars is partnerships. And that was really from the government side. They pushed to have a pillar on partnerships. They also pushed on an implementation part of the strategy, meaning we didn't just sit and write a document. There was questions around how are you going to implement the vision and the mission of the strategy, and it's highly detailed within the purview of government. So yes, implementation was thought of, and you could not think of implementation because it's already happening. It was something that just needed guidance from government in terms of the vision and mission. And tomorrow, Liz will find out more.
Invite to join the launch of the AI strategy tomorrow. Kenya is excited about this. So we'll move to Priya. Ria has done a lot of work at the G20 level, at the AU level, and based on your research and work within these organizations, how do you evaluate the current state of regional and cross-regional integration on digital service provision? I think, again, moving from more localized, more regional initiatives to this international cooperation, and what approaches to these more African or global governance processes, how can we strengthen participatory approaches in that space and ensure that the shared frameworks for data rights, data sovereignty, and data governance work for all who are participating?
Thank you so much. That was a mouthful in the question, so I'm going to do my best to answer it. I think in the interest of time, I'll use some examples of some of the things that we're working on at the African Union level and then at the G20 level. And one of the flagship initiatives for the African Union is the African Union Data Policy Framework that Ria has led. And I think it's a very interesting model. So if you haven't engaged with it yet, please do. Because globally, it's one of the most progressive data policy frameworks because it does something quite unique, and I'll get to that just now. But it's also, I suppose, it's current, it's up to date, and it relates some of the data policy challenges, brings it all together in an integrated way. And it explores some of the tensions that are faced across Middle East and Africa and globally when it comes to how we engage with data and the datafication challenge and some legacy digitization challenges as well. So what's unique about this framework is that it's trying to strike a balance between, on the one hand, the agility and the innovation and the efficiency that we need to really engage with data at various levels across different stakeholders. It's trying to balance that interest and that energy with something that recognizes that data is a good that should be accessible to all. So taking that human-centered approach and introducing elements of inclusivity, equity, and so on, and then using a set of values that we have placed into the framework to assess how a country is progressing and where it might be able to improve its position. We were also working with that framework to see how it might apply to different countries by looking at their specific local context, looking at progress that has been made with digital transformation initiatives, with e-government initiatives. I find all of these to be proxies, even DPI and so on, and then trying to understand what are the real challenges that they are facing in order to make data work for them. And we speak about public value creation, by local communities, local innovators. So how do you get the data to actually start working for those communities? And so that's what that framework is obsessed with. Interestingly, this year we are embedded in the G20 and the T20 process, and one of the questions that we've been asked to frame and input on for both of those different levels of that engagement is around an integrated data governance framework. So how do we have something that is robust? And no surprises, we are leveraging the African Union Data Policy Framework. And so what we will have represented as a kind of progressive and up-to-date model that can be used across the world is something that was homegrown here in Africa, because we've really applied our mind to what are those challenges that are faced by the very hungry citizens and participants that seem to be sitting outside of the data value equation and need to get in. And how do we get them in? So some interesting, I suppose some observations from the engagements today and over the last few days is that we really want to be guided by specific examples of how we can be responsible and how we can unlock these opportunities. We want to be guided by those examples. At the same time, how do we get governance mechanisms to start working for us? So we've got information regulators, or we've got information regulators that are in planning and are being set up at the moment. How do we evolve their role because they have a rights-based mandate, right? They come from the right to access information and the right to privacy. How do we evolve their oversight capability and where they can intervene to becoming real data regulators and bringing oversight to this value creation, data value creation challenge as well? How do they become an ally? So if we say that they are very There are existing relationships between state and private sector on the infrastructure side. How do we start introducing relationships between these data regulators and citizens that place the emphasis on citizens getting value and their rights being defended in these fora? If we think about cybersecurity governance, for instance, we've had this posture around critical infrastructure that had a national security bent to it. But really, critical infrastructure is critical for what we would like to achieve with infrastructure. It's critical to health. It's critical to education. And so by reimagining, I suppose, how those governance structures work, we can also unlock the value in that. And then two more ideas is, and coming out of this framing that we have in the framework, is around, and I suppose, the pressing challenge, and I wrote this down from discussions today and from yesterday, is I think something that we all are vested in, sitting in this room, is how we leverage tech to defend democracy. And not just to deal with the harms that we're seeing, but how we really leverage tech for democracy. And that's something that we have to think about together. And finally, those pesky little things like contracts, licenses, and those little tools that exist, little artifacts that exist. Is there a method now to use those to address some of the asymmetries in data powers that we've been seeing? So let's not ignore them. Let's not imagine them as sitting behind something else and not read them and not use them. They are valuable tools in governance. They are one of the ways that citizens and consumers engage with the powers. And so they are important tools to really get into and see if we can create models and frameworks that bring citizens closer to their interests when they engage with the technology.
Thank you so much, Priya. Some interventions? There's a roaming mic here.
So a very interesting conversation. I'm Ali Rahim. I'm the global lead for citizen engagement at the World Bank. So I'm interested to hear your take on, the power of technology itself to amplify engagement. So this is getting to some of the points you were raising. One of the most underdeveloped use cases is using direct feedback data, sentiment data, combining that with big data analytics to really understand how we can optimize service delivery, how we can optimize engagement. So there's been a lot done in the participatory technology space on developing platforms. Very little done on the interoperability of data. Last week we did a webinar with the government of Uganda, for example. They had about 12 feedback mechanisms available, but no interoperability amongst them, no data analytic model to take that feedback data and actually understand how you use it at scale to see the patterns that would allow you to optimize service delivery. So we talk a lot about engagement on the technology, but the technology itself, especially this use case of LLMs, has incredible power to use feedback and natural language to understand other big data. So would love to hear your take on that and how we can do more to support governments to build that kind of data analytic capacity.
So maybe I'll interject here. I know Alessandro will speak on some of those aspects as well, right? Any other?
No, thanks so much. I think that's what they describe as the wicked problem of today. But it's an interesting one because we know a lot about what works and what doesn't work. And at the same time, we're probably not engaging as much with some of the primary, the primary groups of citizens that we should be engaging with. So I suppose on the one hand, to speak to your challenge about, if we understand, if we have this challenge of how we're using the data when it is available, where does that leave us? And I think it's about looking at, one, how young people are engaging with the data. Personally, and I think what I'm hearing today is like, let's get real about where to put some emphasis and where we go forward. young people are giving us clues about how they are engaging with the data and how they will engage with the data. So we're getting a long-term view. And a long-term view is also crucial because now we understand some new things about data in its longevity. And some of the data we need to access, when you speak about the LLMs, it's very old data where the interoperability and the reuse capability just wasn't built in. So if we know that now, what do we do for the users that are coming and how they might use it in the future, if we would like to do that? And if we can think about that life cycle in a much more practical way, we can probably leverage that data more. At the same time, the wicked part of this problem is that we have all this data that is sitting there that we just can't seem to get to. And we can't take governance mechanisms, which is why we're here speaking about governance mechanisms, and retrofit them. And that's the challenge we haven't been able to solve yet. And we've got a few use cases with some AI innovators in South Africa that you're probably aware of, but are quite interesting. And so I want to challenge us, in as much as we can't fix the problems of old, I think we need to broaden our engagement with future users, future citizens, and try to think about what the life cycle of the data is going to be and how we enable that longevity in the interoperability and in its capability to bring us development and economic outcomes. Yeah.
Maybe just one additional point to this. I think even as we're thinking of applying models to data that citizens have provided in the form of feedback, there has to be some protections to the public that participates, and so that they have trust that even as you're trying to expand the capabilities to respond to them, that you're still maintaining their own privacy and protections, and that there's consent to do that. Great. So moving forward to now global perspectives, I'll come to you, Fola. Based on your work at the Global Center on AI governance and the work you've done on responsible AI, what are the most effective mechanisms you've seen for ensuring algorithmic transparency and accountability in government systems? So just picking off on some of these conversations before, and what approaches best align and can be adapted for various contexts for participants here from Africa and the Middle East?
Thank you very much. I think to piggyback on the point that Priya was making earlier around governance frameworks coming out of the AU, one that also came out last year that I think is quite important to answer your question earlier on is the AU Startups Model Framework. I think that's an important governance document that can help African states to potentially implement some of these action plans that we are seeing in national AI strategies. Now, to your question about algorithmic transparency, I think it's quite important to first understand what it is. And you can look at algorithmic transparency I think in three different ways. One as capacity, right? The ability of actors, internal or external, to the development of algorithms to obtain information, to monitor, test, critique a system. And you can also think of algorithmic transparency in terms of a principle, right? To guide the actions of governments or private actors on how to make information about algorithmic systems accessible and available. Or we can think of algorithmic transparency in terms of explainability. How do you ensure that the outcomes of an algorithmic system can be explained in a way that humans can understand? Now, across these three potential dimensions of algorithmic transparency is a common trend of information disclosure. And there are different types of mechanisms that we are seeing across the globe in relation to this. So in countries like Chile and in the UK, we're increasingly seeing public repositories on algorithms. There's also an increasing push for source code transparency and use of model cards. And model cards essentially details how a system was built, what assumptions were made during the development of that system, and how the model performs in relation to specific groups. And in terms of transparency instruments relating to disclosure or explanations of how an algorithm performs, we can potentially look at it in two ways: supply-driven disclosure or demand-driven disclosure. And for supply-driven disclosure, that would be when you look at the repository of public algorithms that countries outside the continent are increasingly embracing. Also, proactive disclosure on the part of either state or private actors, as well as potentially automated responses that is triggered by how users interact with the system. And then you could also have, within supply-driven disclosure, the publication of audit results, for example, about the system. And then on the other side, you could have demand-driven disclosures, which would essentially be requests for information on the part of the public or sometimes judicial orders for disclosure. Now, in my opinion, on the African continent, we've got several challenges to these different types of transparency mechanisms. And we have a regulation challenge. Our access to information laws do not necessarily capture the kind of information disclosure we're thinking of when it comes to algorithms. So you kind of need some regulatory amendments when it comes to access to information laws. But there's also a resource problem and sustainability problem. How do you create, maintain, and update repositories? And then questions around balancing transparency with protecting sensitive information and intellectual property, which Melissa can speak to, as well as balancing this or dealing with this so-called false dichotomy between security of algorithmic systems as well as building trust in a system through disclosure. And that brings me to the point that was being made earlier on about how the government of Zambia is trying to promote citizen engagement through digital services, when we know that there's a huge digital divide, and access to information is still very much something that needs to be enabled not through digital services, but primarily through other systems that recognizes the state of development on the continent. At one of the side events that happened on Monday, there was an interesting initiative in Uganda in relation to how women could access information, right? And it would be interesting in calling for responses to ask Gilbert to potentially speak more to that and how that could be a mechanism for algorithmic transparency, right? And Gabit has done quite substantial work on algorithmic transparency and automated decision making, and she could speak to that as well. Sorry that took long. Thank you.
That specific people have been called to comment. Who do you remember who gave the Uganda use case? And David? Okay, maybe briefly in 2 minutes describe how that work can support algorithmic transparency.
Thank you very much. This initiative was is a government grant scheme for women who, in spite of the need, were not accessing information on the grants, and therefore were not demanding or applying for these grants. And therefore the uptake was low, and repayment was very poor, and also unintended beneficiaries or wrong beneficiaries were the ones who were actually getting this program. But by making data available and information on what was the program about, being more intentional, reaching out to women in slums, women in informal markets. This increased access to information, and within a very short time of about 6 months, the applications increased like 7-fold. And also there was a great improvement in the repayment of loans in the Kampala capital. The challenge though is that these pilot actions with support from the Carter Center was limited to the city. So outside the city, a lot of these challenges exist, but there are important lessons that could be drawn from this initiative. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Hi. I told Fuller not to involve me, but we did talk about automated decision-making and algorithmic transparency a bit. I think part of how we regulate artificial intelligence in particular is to understand, firstly, that essentially AI governance will be data governance plus, right? So you already have to have those foundations, but that the AI governance will require something more in terms of outcomes and peculiarities based on the technologies. But that they're also, in thinking about regulating AI in the context of algorithmic decision-making, that there's an important intersection with public sector responsibilities, and there are existing mechanisms within the public sector that actually afford you a lot of opportunities to engage with automated decision-making that I think we sometimes don't appreciate. And one mechanism, for instance, is like more traditional administrative justice law and those kinds of things, you know, that there are existing governance mechanisms which can help you engage with these things. But the starting point is actually the demystification of the technology. Because when you do that, you realize there's so many pre-existing opportunities. There's a lot of algorithmic decision-making that's happening in the public sector all the time. I worked on a local municipality in South Africa that uses algorithmic decision-making to manage its indigent management policy. I mean, the smallest municipality you've ever seen. These are demonstrations of how we will need to regulate AI. They exist all around us. So, I mean, that's just, I mean, at a high level would be my input on that.
All right, thank you. My name is Joshua Olufemi. My question really is reflecting as Nigeria, you know, drafts its fourth commitment, and it's a question around the transparency, digital governance, you know, component of it. What we've had with other, you know, should I say, sectors or issues such as public procurement, beneficial ownership, is that you have a data standard that you're looking forward to using to drive that access to data, access to information, and even the use of it. So the question is, have you seen, you know, use cases or digital governance framework of other government that is already, you know, integrating some kind of standard, especially when it comes to how government agencies are using, deploying, or developing AI tools that can, you know, become a reference point? And if there aren't any, beyond the principles of inclusivity, you know, and just being able to do, like Dr. Fola mentioned, the demand side and supply side ability to request for the information, what are those things that need to go into how government and governance of AI is thinking from a protocol or standard point of view?
So there's actually a use case from Nigeria, when Nigeria tried to expand its social protection program and decided that it was going to hire a private company to, and it was a World Bank funded project, and they were going to do satellite uses satellite sensor technologies to identify Nigerians living in urban slums and identify them as potential beneficiaries for cash transfer programs. And the problem with that use case, of course, is the fact that the public procurement process was quite confidential. So how they went about selecting the particular service provider and the mechanisms around data transfers in that specific initiative, because it required government to provide data to the private company. It required government-mandated banks to supply details of identified beneficiaries directly, to the developer. And then there was also a requirement for mobile phone providers to provide metadata on the locations of these people. So there was quite a number of troubling outcomes out of that process. And it highlighted the need, as you rightly point out, to develop important standards and processes when AI is being deployed within a public service delivery space, which we are not currently seeing.
Thank you so much. We have just 15 minutes and we'll finish with the last two panelists. So to Alessandro, you work with the OECD and they have developed a set of AI principles. And how can these principles be meaningfully integrated into digital service delivery frameworks and ensure governments are held accountable for the digital technologies they deploy, but also maybe speaking a little bit about how the OECD also supports in the development of digital tools that can really support this engagement and between governments and their citizens. Thanks.
Thank you. Also for me, that's quite a lot for 5 minutes. I'll do my best. So indeed, the OECD adopted some AI principles in 2019, which then were updated in the last 2 years and culminated into the OECD recommendation on artificial intelligence from last year. So maybe quickly explain what an OECD recommendation is to begin with. So these are the OECD legal instruments, as we call them. So it's basically soft law, if you want, that the member countries of the OECD adopt, and then they have to adhere to, and then other countries can voluntarily also adhere to, if so they wish, of course. So these principles, this recommendation from 2024 includes some definitions to begin with, and then 5 principles. These principles, the idea is that they are targeted, of course, to governments. We are an intergovernmental international organization, so governments are our main stakeholders, but also to other actors in the field. So that's important to stress. We call them AI actors in general. So these 5 principles, first, make sure that AI systems contribute to an inclusive growth, sustainable development, and well-being. Second principle is about respect of rule of law, human rights, and democratic values. So very much in line with OGP values. So basically about AI systems that should respect democratic values, diversity, including safeguards. Principle number 3 is about transparency and explainability. We heard a lot about transparency just about now, but this is all about make sure that people understand what they engage with when they use AI systems. Principle number 4 is about building AI systems in a robust, secure, and safe way through their entire life cycle. And principle number 5 is about accountability. So again, a key principle of open government. So basically that it's about the fact that AI actors should be accountable for the deployment, the development, the operation of the systems. So based on these 5 principles, the OECD recommendation also has sort of encourages adherents to invest in research and development, to foster an inclusive AI enabling ecosystem, shape an enabling interoperable governance and policy environment for AI, build human capacity, prepare for labor market transformation, and strengthen international cooperation for trustworthy AI. So it's basically, it is very broad, but it's interesting to see that at least 3 of the 5 principles are actually directly in line with open government principles. Now, focusing on our angle, I'm from the Public Governance Directorate of the OECD, and more specifically from the Open Governance team. Our angle is basically the government as a user of AI. So this is what we focus on. And we are currently finalizing a flagship report on governing with AI that should be published in June. The other key thing we do at the OECD on top of standards and policy guidelines is publication. So this report will analyze basically the opportunities and the risks from a government perspective of using AI systems. So looking at both the transformative impact, but also all the risks, and is based on about 150 case studies from different countries, mostly OECD members, actually. And so this report will look at the let's say proposes a framework that has enablers, guardrails, and engagement. So basically this is how the OECD will see governments making a trustworthy use of AI in public sectors. So enablers are about governance, capabilities, collaborations, and so on. Guardrails are about, of course, regulations and oversight, ethical frameworks and standards. And then there is engagement, which is the part where we will advocate for governments to engage with non-state actors, both at the national and international level. And this is where the role of citizens come in. Of course, since citizens, I mean, the AI will and is radically reshaping the relationship between the state and the systems, and the state and citizens, then we advocate for citizens to have a say from agenda setting to technology design, technology assessment, regulation. Basically, this mirrors the whole idea that citizens should be involved in all the policy cycle of any public policies. And so what we do, we are looking at a lot of current cases, good practices. That's another thing that we do at the OECD. We like to collect good practices and then disseminate, and then putting people in touch and disseminating them. But one thing that we're looking at from this angle is the use of innovative forms of citizen participation to shape AI. And particularly, we're seeing that deliberative processes might be useful and interesting in this field. 30 seconds. Deliberative process is basically citizen assemblies and the like, which is when a sample of citizens are randomly selected so that they are representative for the demographic of a country, for example. And these are particularly useful ways to address value-based dilemmas, complex problems that require a long-term perspective, ethical issues, and so on. There are a couple of examples that we've seen and that we studied, both at local level, but also more at regional and global level. And happy to expand on that if needed. Thank you.
A couple of reactions to OECD. Okay, hold that thought. We'll go to the last speaker and then we'll come back to you, okay? And so I think as we're moving from more regional context and moved up to the global context, it still seems that the governance frameworks become far removed from the citizen, in as much as we've had very practical examples of how you're each looking at these. So this is why it's very important to have intermediaries like Maurice Thanthan, who works with the media and has done investigative reporting on digital governance. So from your experience, what are the most significant, transparency gaps you've seen in how governments communicate with their citizens? And how might civil society organizations, many of who are present in this room, and media organizations can support and better equip ordinary citizens to meaningfully participate in these increasingly complex digital governance frameworks.
Thank you, Leonida. Thank you all. And first of all, allow me to take this opportunity to reflect on the fact that my country, Benin, has now become a member of the OGP community. Thank you very much. I first engaged with OGP during the Global Summit in Paris back in 2016. So it's now almost 10 years of advocacy, and now we are a member. I'm very happy of that. But I will also, that's the reason why I can truly relate to the remarks from Aidan yesterday during OGP camp. So I want to take this opportunity to call up all of our colleagues from different countries that we civil society actors from Benin, we are open and keen to learn from your experience, from what you have done in your countries in order to make the best out of this new commitment of our government. And that's back to your question, Leonida, and for me, from my experience, the first transparency gap that I see in terms is not even related to the use of the data, but first of all to the access to them, to the access to information. In our countries, it's still challenging to have access to the data. So we are talking about access to information concern. I think that Bola have already raised this concern during the conversation. So is an important challenge that we have to overcome. For instance, in Benin, the inexistence of an open data platform where people, citizens, civil society actors, researchers, journalists can have access to reliable, timely data is a challenge we have to overcome. For instance, one of the questions citizens in Benin keep asking is, what is the cost of the infrastructure we are building? And most of the times, no one knows the answer. So it's a big concern. The second transparency gap that I will mention, and this one is related to the use of the data, is the lack of clear and accessible communication on AI and automated decision-making process. 2 years ago, in 2023, Benin has adopted, like most of our country now, AI and big data strategies. While this framework has been designed through a collaborative approach, there is still no open and auditable repository of algorithms that have been using in public services. So I think that it's also a challenge, an issue, because it's making it difficult for citizens to access, to understand how the decisions are being making, and if necessary, to challenge them. I can also mention the week of public consultation before deploying the digital system, because in Benin since 2016, we have made a lot of progress in terms of digital transformation, but most of the time, the government just came and said, like, we have built this, use it, you have to use it. And most of the time, the digital systems is used for, I would say, for the priorities that the government have made alone. We are not using much as that, the digital transformative tools to make people to involve them in the decision-making process. I think that we can do better in this space. The second part of your question in 30 seconds, please, is I do believe that civil society organization, media professional have a crucial role to play in order to equip and better support ordinary people to participate in digital conversation, digital governance conversation. But how we can do that? That's the question. I will just mention 3 recommendations quickly. The first one is that we need to continuously build digital literacy programs that are citizen-friendly. I think that the digital revolution in our countries is something that is quite recent. And looking the fact that most of our citizen fellows are not alphabetized, we need to train them, to embark them in this journey so they can also take advantage of the potential of digital. The second one is, as civil society actors, we need to keep advocating, we need to keep pushing for more openness in Benin. We need to, for instance, keep pushing for open data, open source tools, and things like that. And lastly, it's also important to empower investigative journalism, also data journalism, because when journalists and media practitioners can partner with researchers, academics, they can deepen data and unveil ethical concern like, I would say, of ethical concern of algorithm like discrimination. Thank you very much.
We just have less than 5 minutes to wrap up this breakout. And I wanted us to get final comments from the audience, especially for these last 2 interventions. So there was one there, and then at the end.
Thanks for the presentation. Mine was just a short comment. My name is Moses Otieno. Short question to Alessandro. It's on policy coherence with OECD principles. What are the points of convergence if you look at the AI policies that are being developed in Africa with the principles as outlined from the OECD? Because when I listened also to Melissa, whom I've met, I think I met in 2019 when I worked with HIVOS. She speaks about African values and principles. Are those captured under OECD principles? And where do you see the convergence, and what would be your recommendations? Thank you.
Godfrey is my name, from Nairobi. I'm the point of contact for Nairobi OGP, and also I head public participation and citizen engagement department for the government of Nairobi. I think I had interest in this session because we had, let me just give a very brief intro to what I want to say. We did a research last year on the status of public participation and citizen engagement in Nairobi, right from the beginning of last year almost to the end. It ran for almost 1 year, working with almost at least 10 non-state actors. And some of the findings that came out is that it's almost less than 1% of the population has been effectively involved in public participation. And that to us was a big concern. You know, Nairobi daytime is like close to 7 million people. Night is roughly 5 million people. So our concern and our strategy is how to enhance digital participation. We have digital participation. You remember our governor mentioned it yesterday, but it is still very basic. We were partnering with a non-state actor, but it is a small non-state actor which has not developed a very robust system. So, so it is also not really reaching out to Nairobians very well. I don't know those who could be having a working system, as more so for African cities, that you can share with us, because we'd want to enhance public participation, but the physical public participation alone is not really working for Nairobi with that population. We would want to enhance digital participation in Nairobi, but we need a more robust system that can help us achieve this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, Alessandro, you will respond to the first one, and I'll open it up to the panel to respond to Nairobi.
Thank you. No, very briefly, thanks for your question. The OECD standards and recommendations are, the ambition is for them to be global. So of course they cannot take into consideration the specificity of different regions or countries, not just Africa, but also the other regions of the world. And of course I'm conscious of the fact that they are developed by OECD member countries. And then other countries can decide voluntarily to adhere to them if so they wish. So this is, of course, is an important factor to keep in mind. However, when we talk about AI, that should contribute to sustainable growth, to development, to inclusive growth. When we talk about transparency and accountability, I believe these concepts, at least in our community of the open government, I think we consider them quite global and universal. So I encourage you to use this recommendation, as an advocacy tool to the extent that you think it's relevant to your context. Thank you.
Any other response to Nairobi County? And it can also be from other participants.
Fola is pointing fingers at me. I think public participation is a really interesting topic in our current climate. We have the public participation bill, which I don't know if it has passed yet. Let me speak in a process that I've been involved in. I think it has to be a conscious effort from the beginning of whatever instrument you're seeking public participation for. That is really a thing that we had to push for in the very beginning as we were thinking about the AI strategy, to ensure that we kept in mind that we needed the citizens of Kenya to be involved in the process. That's why I keep talking about the stakeholder framework and how a major stakeholder is the user. When we look at the implementation of how to conduct public participation, I think that's the problem. And I know you're asking about how do you do that digitally, but I think the question should be a little bit more simple than that. In Kenya, we've been accused of having very short periods for public participation. So whether that's analog or digital, that will be a problem. How many strategies have we had within the last 12 to 24 months? And each and every one of them only had 7 days open for public participation. Then it doesn't look funny to get 1% participating. Also, what is the mode of the public participation? For the strategy, I know we looked for, we conducted focus group discussions, town halls, and moved with communities or community-led initiatives to have them really pull out from the citizens what they would want. And we are very conscious about diluting the language in a way that they could understand. So I think public participation in itself is not just an event within an instrument. It has to be a whole initiative on its own that is constantly running. Digitally, I would say, start with access, with who you're targeting in Nairobi. In Nairobi, power would be a major issue. Mobile devices is another issue that I would just comment on as academia. I have to say I'm commenting as academia, so that's the lens that I'm using. Yeah. On the issue of African versus global, I think define for us what global means. I think local context is important in Africa because our use of AI, our use of emerging tech, and our participation in the global market in terms of the development of emerging tech really would factor how we determine our policies and governance. So I tend to say that you have to start from inside before you go outward.
Thank you so much, and a big round of applause to all of you who participated, to our panelists. I think that was very insightful, just trying to understand, even just across the board from local to global, how we are still intentional in centering the citizen, and we have a long way to go. So I hope that you have been inspired to go back and look at your own frameworks and see how you can pick some of what we've learned today and move that, especially with the OGP processes, moving forward. So I know Tim had a quick announcement, but I'll also bundle you out of the room so that they can set it up for the next one.
Thank you very much to Leonida and the panel and all of you for a really interesting conversation. So just a quick announcement on what's happening next. So in this room from 4 o'clock, it'll just be a networking space. But I'd really encourage you to head to the Mount Kenya room at 4 o'clock, where we'll be celebrating the OpenGov Challenge entrance. We'll have refreshments, there'll be music, it'll be fun, lively, so come along